So today we're going to be taking a look at a scenario where the West goes to war with the entire world. Now the West refers to a group of nations who are Western in geopolitical nature, but it can also be a cultural thing, a technology thing, and a lot more. So these countries here, you may not agree with them. Like for example, maybe some of these Balkan nations should be Western considering that they're in NATO, or maybe you consider Japan and South Korea as Western nations since they are geopolitically connected to the West. But this is the map that I have come up with, and there's also Australia and New Zealand, who are definitely Western nations. So we're going to be looking at a scenario where they attempt to take on the entire world. If you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. All the support is greatly appreciated as we're trying to get to 200,000 subscribers by August 1st. We're around 8,000 away, so even if you are already subscribed, showing support on this video does boost the channel and help us reach new viewers. And with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump straight into this video. So the West is going to be taking on the world. Now, notably, the West has a nation like the United States on their side, which is great because they're the #1 power in the world. But the non-Western nations have countries like Russia, China, and India, who are 2, 3, and 4, making it kind of a challenge for the West to win. But we're going to see if they could pull it off. So first of all, we have the US invading into Mexico. This is the first place that the fighting begins, as US troops who were probably already on the border start to move right on into Mexico. The US military will prioritize moving out from Texas and California. Those are 2 very valuable states, and you definitely don't want any intrusions into either. But eventually a solidified front line will pop out. Now moving deeper into Mexican territory, it's likely that we would see a very quick taking of Baja California, as the US Navy would simply outclass and overpower the Mexican Navy. Now of course this isn't just the US versus Mexico. There are a ton of other nations involved down here in Latin America, and they would most likely be sending their troops and support up to Mexico in order to fight off the US. Now the US would also have to be sending their troops and supplies over to Europe, who is in for some trouble likely, but we'll have to see. Down here in South America, we have French Guiana getting toppled very easily. And heading on over here to Europe, we have the Western nations focusing in on the Balkan nations that are not aligned with them. So Bosnia and Herzegovina will be the first to fall as they lose their capital city. And to be honest with you guys, these middle Balkan countries are not in a good spot. Now, not only are they fairly weak, other than Serbia, but they're also just surrounded by nations that are a ton stronger than them. So Greece invades up into Albania, takes their capital. Bulgaria will then help them out in taking out North Macedonia, and the remainder of these Western European nations will move into Serbia, taking their capital. And eventually, this entire middle area would be taken. Maybe not before the Eastern Europeans started moving in, but definitely these guys would all fall. Now, speaking of those Eastern European nations, this is going to get rough for the West right off the bat, because Russia as well as Belarus will be invading into the Baltic nations, who are very, very, very weak compared to Russia. And these guys, much like the Balkans, would fall pretty quickly. Now, NATO defensive forces do have a chance at defending these guys, more specifically the naval aspect of this. So in the Baltic Sea, the West would have a supreme advantage against Russia. Obviously, Russia's navy would get thrown out by Europe's navy, and maybe Russia's army would too. I mean, Ukraine has been going on for a few years now. But hey, I'm not here to judge. I'm here to draw colors on a map. Anyway, Turkey will now be sending their forces into Greece and Bulgaria, but they won't be going too far, as they're going to be waiting for reinforcements from the Middle East and likely the entire world. Now down here in Oceania, it's it's pretty bleak, because Australia and New Zealand obviously are the stronger nations down here. There's also Indonesia, who would be able to fight up against Australia, but assuming the West wants to take as much land as possible and get as much war score as possible, they'll be invading these island nations out here in the Pacific, and then move up into the Solomon Islands, and Australia will make a landing in southern Papua New Guinea. Back over in the Americas, we have the US Navy taking out the Bahamas. I don't even know if they have a military, to be honest with you. Probably not, since they're more than likely protected by either the UK or the US. But that doesn't matter, because the US will then be making a landing in Hispaniola in order to take over Haiti, another very weak country that'd be very easy to topple. From here, the US will then use Puerto Rico and take out the Dominican Republic, make a landing in Jamaica, and then make multiple landings across Cuba, as this nation will also be very quick to fall over to the US forces. Now, as you can see, the US is doing a majority of the heavy lifting so far for the West. Of course, the US is the strongest country in the world, which is good for the West, but unfortunately the US geographically is not really near like the most Western nations, which are all in Europe. So geography is kind of a challenge here for the West. They're separated by the Atlantic Ocean. Anyway though, US forces will then capture the major city of Montany from Mexico, followed by a quick invasion of Chihuahua. Yes, Yes, that is the city name if you didn't know. And then the US will slither their way down the western Mexican coast, reaching deeper into Latin America. A landing in the Yucatan Peninsula will be made, followed by the capturing of the major city of Merida. Over in Europe, we have the Western nations invading into Belarus and Ukraine. They will take the city of Lviv from Ukraine, and then move into Moldova, taking their capital city, and furthering their push into Ukraine. Now, so far, so good for the West. You know, they have taken out the Balkans, they have lost the Baltics, but they are starting an invasion into Ukraine and Moldova. Up north, we also see Finland start to invade into areas of Russia, but down south, the reinforcements have arisen as the non-Western nations start to push further into Greece, now threatening this major city and heading deeper into Bulgarian territory. Back down in Oceania, we have Australia capturing the capital city of Papua New Guinea, which doesn't eliminate them from the war, but it does severely weaken them, making it easier for Australia to gain complete control of the southern portion of Papua New Guinea. Australian forces then start to move into Indonesia, but do not go any further as reinforcements have arrived from, well, Indonesia. We then see the US start to island hop across this chain of islands in the southern Atlantic, or more so the southern Caribbean, which is more than likely an attempt to start getting ready for a possible naval invasion of South America should it come to it. Now, I know what you guys are all thinking. The West is screwed in this video, right? Maybe. We'll have to see, because if the West is able to take out all of the Americas, it could be a game changer. But then again, they are fighting against like pretty much the entirety of the world. And to be completely honest with you, the main source of power coming from the non-Western nations is over here in Asia with China and India. And then you also have the Middle East, who is supplying the whole thing with their oil reserves. And then you have the economical capitals of the non-Western nations, such as Japan, Korea, and once again China. And as you'll notice, all of these nations are pretty far away from the front lines of this war, meaning that the West will have to penetrate pretty deep into the territory of the non-Western nations if they want to have a chance at winning this war. More specifically, they'll probably have to make a game plan for taking out the Middle East and find a way to cripple China, India, and the other Eastern nations. But that's a long way to go. They have to get closer first, so let's see if they can do that. Back over in Mexico, we have US forces continuing to broaden their front line and also move down the eastern coast of Mexico this time, starting to get near towards Mexico City, their capital. Over in Yucatan, the invasion continues as they now reach down to the border of Belize. Also, I do want to say, if you didn't see the live stream or you didn't see the last Wednesday video, we added a lot of new stuff to this map. As you can see, there's provinces, there's rivers, we have major cities, which are already enabled, but we also have capital cities now. We have a ton of alliances, the G20, the G7, AUKUS, Kanzik, BRICS, even the Rio Pact. So I just want to say that these Wednesday scenario videos are going to be a lot more detailed, and the quality of the videos in general are going to be a lot better. I'm trying to make a strive to improve the quality of the content on this channel, so I'm trying to make an effort to do that, and you know, upgrading this map is a part of doing that. Anyway, enough yapping. I don't think you guys like it when I yap this much. The Europeans. Oh boy. Now, there are going to be probably a lot of mixed opinions on the European front here, because some might say that the Western nations would have zero chance into invading Ukraine and Belarus, or even getting near Kyiv, which I don't think is that where Kyiv is? That might be placed wrong. But now, back down to Greece. This is where I guess the beginning of the end will come for the southern Western nations, because all of Africa, all of the Middle East, and likely India are sending troops into Greece. They'll take over Crete with their navy, make a landing in this southern peninsula, and take it with zero resistance. Well, I mean, of course, there's resistance there, but compared to the number of troops that the non-Western nations are throwing at the West, yeah, there's basically no resistance. Greece will completely fall, and with this, the non-Western nations will start to liberate the Balkans, going into Albania, taking Tirana and liberating them. Then we see the liberation of other Balkan nations. They take Pristina and Kosovo, move into Montenegro, take their capital and liberate them, and then start sending their armies into Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia. Meanwhile, Bulgaria will completely cease to exist, and the Belarusian front line will be pushed back. Noticeably, the Ukrainian front line is not pushed back, which leads to my next thing to talk about, which is what the non-Western nations maybe try to sabotage each other. The West is pretty united geopolitically, although the US has been making strides in the opposite direction. Still, these nations have each other's back pretty much no matter what. If a world war were to ever break out, I can guarantee you that the red team would look exactly like this, plus a few more. The only nation I'm not too sure about that, though, is Hungary. They're kind of weird sometimes. But like, would Russia, go against Ukraine here? Would they refuse to help them out since they're at war in real life? But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you think Russia would help Ukraine, or do you think they would leave them to die? Anyway, the West just took over Kaliningrad. That's surprising. And they're now starting to liberate into the Baltics, more specifically Lithuania and a lot of the Latvian coastal areas. And this strive is most likely a push against Russia. If you consolidate this entire front line and take all this land, then you have a way easier push to Moscow. Whereas, you know, taking out Ukraine and then going up makes it a little bit more difficult, but it does make the approach on Russia easier. It just costs a lot more manpower. And to be honest with you, the West doesn't have a lot of manpower to throw around compared to their opponent here. Back over in the Americas, we have the US Special Forces going right on into Mexico City and taking that thing. It would be a very bloody battle. Mexico City is very populated, but the US would come out on top, making Mexico start to capitulate as they only have one major city left. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of this city. If you know it, you know it. If you don't, then you still don't. Actually, you know what? I'll give it a shot. Guadalajara. Did I say that right? Let me know in the comments. But with them losing their final major city and not really having much land that is populated, because there's a lot of mountain here, Mexico will capitulate on over to the west, not being the first nation to fall to the west, but being the first major nation to fall to the west, as US and Canadian forces will continue their push into Central America. I know that I'm just brushing over these countries like it's nothing, but just know that for pacing's sake and for the sake of eventuality, which means like eventually the US would be able to do this, we're just gonna, you know, do it anyway. Let's go ahead and check in on Oceania. Oh, the Chinese are here. Okay, there goes that. So Australia is kicked out of Papua New Guinea and Indonesia as the forces of China, Korea, Japan, and likely India and Indonesia are all here for them. Is that a coalition that Australia and New Zealand can beat? Let's think about that for a second, actually. I'm going to say no. Oh yeah, absolutely not. So the East Asians will start their invasion into Australia. We all know that the geography of Australia is not fun. Big desert, very big desert, lots and lots of desert. So their forces will mostly just be focused on taking the coastal areas of Australia. The first major city they take is Brisbane over here in Australia. Now I was going to say that they take the northern coast of Australia here, but looking at like this map and the northern coast and seeing how jagged it is, I want to say that this is probably not too geographically pleasant to invade. I don't know the geography of this region. I don't know the geography of every single country in the world. That's kind of hard to know. So Australia here is getting pretty messed up. To be completely honest with you, they'd fall pretty quickly. Not because Australia is a pushover, but because Australia is up against some, you know, big hands here. These are some big hands, and these big hands are being thrown pretty hard. And also, to top it all off, Australia and New Zealand are likely getting zero help from the Western nations because they're focused on defending themselves. Maybe the US is sending troops and resources? I doubt it though, because Australia probably isn't too much of a big need for them. But what is a big need for them is Europe, of course. And still, that's not going well, as Romania loses their capital city and Serbia regains theirs, uncapitulating the country and bringing them right back into the war. We then see the complete liberation of Moldova, as they are completely uncapitulated. We then see the recapturing of Lviv from Ukraine, and overall Western forces are starting to get pushed out of this region. Finland will ever so slightly expand their front line, but they aren't really going to go too much further because the Russian defensive forces are being bolstered by the forces of pretty much the entire world. Back over in the Americas, the US is still doing United States things, messing with Central America, overthrowing governments, and installing dictators. Wait, did I say that out loud? Anyway, San Jose will be taken away from Costa Rica. Following by that, we have the US capturing the Panama Canal and also taking Panama City, which gives the United States access and control of the Panama Canal and trade throughout the Americas, which could be good for the West, could also be bad. Okay, but now with the West having complete control over all of North America, it begins a new question. Do the North American armies stay here and continue to fight against South America, or do the North American armies get sent over into Europe? In comes the Darien Gap. You cannot cross this. You cannot send troops through this. You cannot drive through this. The only way you get from North to South America is by boat or plane. There is no realistic walking through here. It's hell on earth. And it also serves as a natural defensive boundary when wars are ongoing. So Colombia likely would not be able to send troops into Panama because of the Darien Gap. Now they could load them up on boats and then land them in Panama, sure, but then you're fighting against the US Navy, and the US Navy would be able to hold off all of South America. Trust me, it's a little bit insane how good the US Navy is. Or the US military in general is just very overpowered. Romania is going to fall, and then we have non-Western forces pushing up against this river in Hungary, setting up a natural boundary between them and the West. They also push up against it in Serbia and up against it in Croatia. Now Croatia is a little bit different because the river goes like that. So these forces slowly snake their way up the coast and then capture the capital cities of both Croatia and Slovenia. But then the North Americans begin to send their armies over, so they will not be fighting against South America, as I alluded to. They will instead be fighting in Europe, which gives the Europeans a little bit more of a chance, although that chance is still looking pretty bleak. Speaking of bleak, Australia is not going to be around for much longer. We have the city of Sydney being captured, followed by their capital city. And from here, Australia is pretty much done for. There's still Perth, but then Perth is no longer here. Now, Australia only has 2 major cities. We have Melbourne, and then we have Adelaide. But these are southern Australian cities. They're kind of far away from the East Asians, but still, they're gonna fall. Because yes, a lot of manpower is going into Australia because knocking them out means that you can then move these armies into Europe or into North America. So the non-Western nations are right now prioritizing getting Australia out of the war. And they pretty much just did that. So Australia will capitulate. And then there's New Zealand. Yeah, Auckland's going bye-bye and so is their capital. Yeah, New Zealand doesn't stand a chance. Sorry, New Zealand. You guys got cool mountains and cool nature, and I think The Lord of the Rings was filmed here, so cool. I don't think I've actually ever really talked about New Zealand before outside of just saying their name. So shout out to New Zealand. Thank you for being in the corner of the map. Okay, but Oceania is now wiped out. The West has lost Oceania, which means that China, the East Asian nations, Southeast Asia, Indonesia, India, pretty much everyone over here in this portion of the map will be sending their armies into Europe. Now, like I just said, the North American armies are now arriving. They might be exhausted, but they are still going to have an effect on this war as they push right back into Bosnia and take the capital of Serbia once more. We have the complete liberation of Hungary, but they don't go into Romania. And that's mostly because the Western nations are focusing in on the Baltics, taking back all of the Baltic coasts, as well as 2 out of 3 of the capital cities of the Baltics. But then we have Finland getting completely kicked out of Russia, and then the entourage of East Asian troops arrive. I don't know if entourage is like the correct word to use. An entourage of people surrounding a general? That makes more sense. But I'm more so trying to refer to the fact that there's millions upon millions of troops marching into Europe, and they do not care about geography. Okay, fine. I'll throw the river layer on just so we be a little bit more realistic. But with the arrival of the entirety of the non-Western nations' armies minus South America, Europe is in trouble. Africa finally makes a landing into Spain, taking Gibraltar and then moving into the south of actual Spain. They move over into Portugal and take Lisbon with ease and start to move their way up the coast of Spain, taking over Valencia and then in these 3 islands. They then push up against this southern river, creating a natural boundary between them and the red team. Another naval landing is made by Africa, this time in Italy. They take the major city of Palermo and then take the entire island of Sicily. Next up, we have Kaliningrad getting liberated, and followed by this is the invasion of Poland, with non-Western troops aiming to push up against this river, but also and more importantly focusing in on the capital city of Poland, which is Warsaw, and they will be able to take it. With this, the Western nations have lost the first major capital, other than like Australia, maybe Greece or Romania. This is the first major capital city to fall, and with it falls the entire Polish army. Well, not really. Poland is one of those nations that if, you know, faced with utter defeat, they would keep fighting. Pretty sure the entire Polish population would rise up and like fight back because Poland is very nationalistic like that. At least that's what it seems like from online. But Krakow will be then taken and the troops will advance past the river, now going towards Germany. For the first time in a very long time, tanks will be rolling towards Germany instead of out of Germany, and that frightens the Germans, who are still sorry about what happened in World War II. We then see the Slovakian capital of Bratislava be captured. Might have pronounced that wrong, sorry. Followed by the capturing of Vienna from Australia. That's not Australia, that's Austria. But as you can see, the West has now started to officially lose this war. Also, sorry if I sound stuffy or sick. It's because I think I am, but it's a really weird sickness because like I'm getting over it. Like I feel like I'm gonna be feeling better in the matter of either tomorrow or the day after, which makes it a really short sickness. But I think it was caused by me like being in a pool. I was swimming and then like I accidentally intaked a bunch of water and then the chlorine is like messing with me. I think that's what it is. I don't know if that's actually a thing. Doctors in the comments, let me know. I don't think a single doctor has ever watched an AdizzPro video before, but hey, you never know. Anyway, the fall of Europe is on the rise as the southern European nations begin to tumble. We have the capturing of Naples in Italy, followed very shortly by the capturing of Rome. The non-Western nations will then push up against this river here, then taking over San Marino. Is San Marino a Western nation? Probably. It's in the middle of Italy, so we're assuming it's Western, right? I really don't like assuming things in videos, but I do it a lot. But I also like to open the door for you guys to correct me, and I encourage you to correct me because I also learn a lot from you guys. And instead of, you know, relying on my knowledge and what I've learned throughout the years and what I continue to learn, I can also rely on you guys. So once again, let me know in the comments if I get something wrong or if I'm like just completely wrong about something. Please correct me. Anyway, in Spain, we now have the non-Westerners pushing up against the next river in Spain. You see, Spain has a lot of rivers, and they all kind of go like across. They're all kind of parallel to each other. I mean, you can see it on the map here. I don't really have to tell you much more than that. Which, you know, makes the invasion of Spain a little bit more interesting because they're going river by river. Speaking of river, they now push up north here, getting towards France. They're setting up an offensive for France, and this is the breeding ground for that. But first, they make a little excursion over and take Barcelona, and then because I don't like Andorra, we're taking Andorra over. Just kidding, Andorra, you're a beautiful nation, even though we can't see you on this map. Now, the Americas have been pretty unchanged, and that's for a pretty good reason. The Darien Gap, and also considering that the non-Western nations aren't too focused on North America right now, that likely comes in the end if they get to that point. But South America here, they're probably just playing the waiting game. Yeah, Europe is falling, that's definitely why. But as for Spain, they will lose Madrid, and with the loss of Madrid, they basically lose their entire country. Non-Western forces will push up and make contact with this bay over here, which knocks Portugal and Spain both out of the war, and leaves France to defend themselves on their border. Now, luckily for France, they do have a mountain range right here, which kind of protects them from invading troops, which means that Africa likely won't be able to penetrate further into France, but they have done it before. I don't know if we're going to be getting a tourist part 2, guys. It may not end so well this time. Same thing with Italy here. They basically lost all major cities within them. There's still Milan, but Milan is now gone, so Italy will be capitulating. And very quickly, the Western nations are losing their stronger nations. Italy, Spain, Poland, all gone. We also lost Greece and Romania, and the blue team troops are right on the border of Germany. Poland will now capitulate. They finally give up fighting. They were promised a non-communist future, and that riled the spirits of the old politicians in Poland, who then accepted defeat. Once again, I don't think they would actually surrender. Poland is not like that. But Czechia will fall, and after the fall of Czechia, Austria will be focused on, and they also fall. And now we're getting kind of complicated here because there are a lot of mountains on this southern border. You of course have the mountain range in France, but then you also have the Alpine Mountains, which go through Switzerland and Austria, which basically says that these Western European nations are safe for now, other than Germany, because there's no Alpine Mountains in Germany. They might be cooked. Yeah, they're cooked. Berlin falls. But the non-Western nations will now strategize a little bit better and focus on Finland. Finland versus the world. How does that go? All right, Finland lost. And with the loss of their entire southern area, Finland will capitulate. Whoa. And the non-Western nations will begin to slither down the coast of Sweden. Now, once again, the non-Western nations are able to maintain these like little slither things. I guess that's what we're calling this. Only because there's like so many troops here. Millions of troops, probably. And the West also definitely has millions of troops as well. The reserves are all active. In fact, most of these nations are probably doing total war, meaning that like all civilians are involved in the war process as well. But unfortunately for the Western nations, they just simply do not have the numbers to compete with the non-Western nations. Now the West, they might have a technology advantage, but then you also have to remember that the non-Western nations have a country like China on their side, and South Korea and Japan. These are very technologically advanced nations. I don't know how much of a role technology would actually play in a war like this. Probably a little bit, maybe significantly. Definitely cyber warfare would be huge. But to the extent where it gives one side a huge advantage of the other, that's likely not the case. So once again, going back to raw numbers, the non-Western nations just have way too many troops for the West to deal with. Also, nuclear bombs. What about those? Yeah, no, realistically, they would all be fired the instant that this war started. Like the US and Russia are lighting each other up, and then, you know, there's also China, and there's the UK and France, there's Israel supposedly, maybe Iran, we're still trying to figure that out. Maybe India and Pakistan will start nuking each other, but realistically, in this scenario at least, probably not. There's a lot of nuclear nations on both sides. So yeah, the world would probably end if we really did want to factor in nukes, but we're not factoring in nukes. So Germany has fallen, that's pretty apparent, and Sweden has as well. We then have the non-Western nations going up into Norway, taking over Oslo, and that basically does it for the Scandinavian countries. They will all capitulate over to the non-Western nations. Denmark here, let's just get that out of the way. Not even 6 hours. We're going in for 2 hours. Okay, but this now leaves basically France, the lowlands, Switzerland, the British Isles, and then Iceland, Greenland, USA, and Canada versus the world. Alright, so I'm going to give you guys a pretty detailed ending to this war. The non-Western nations will go up and follow this river here in France. They'll do the same thing over here from Italy. They'll take Lyon from France. Switzerland would be pretty interesting because good luck invading Switzerland, but, you know, we're going to do it anyway. Liechtenstein will fall before Switzerland does, but very shortly after, so does Switzerland. And then comes the big French campaign. Basically sweeping through this area and running straight towards Paris. Honestly, the tanks would not stop rolling. They'd be put on floats right across this river and continue in, which is what they do. They then take over Paris. Sorry, I'm also slurring my speech a little bit. That's not a symptom of me being sick. That's a symptom of it being 4:50 in the morning. But France will fall, and then we have the British on their isles and the Irish there as well. And that's it. Basically, the West is now just this. Okay, to put it simply, the UK is gone and so is Ireland, and then Iceland would fall. And then you get to North America. It gets a little bit more tricky here because you have to send troops across an ocean. So what would be the strategy here of the non-Western nations? You can't really, you know, go across. I mean, you probably could go across the Pacific and invade the Western United States, but there's definitely a better way to do this. And I think that would be sending your troops down to South America, loading them up on boats and invading Panama, and then kind of snaking your way up into Mexico. And then from there, yeah, so that's what they do. The non-Western nations will then land in southern Panama and basically just like pound troops into this thing. I'm talking tens of millions, probably. We're assuming at this point that the non-Western nations want to get this war over with. It's pretty obvious that they're going to win, but it's also pretty obvious that the West would not surrender until it's over, and it wouldn't really be 100% over until the US fall. Right now it's about 99% over, so there's still 1% to go. But now with the Navy of the entire world, the Army of the entire world, and the Air Force of the entire world, the Central American countries will be liberated faster than you can say pepperoni pizza. This little liberation campaign will quickly turn into a very large liberation campaign, as the blue team will, you know, just obliterate any offensive forces against them, or defensive forces. Puerto Rico will be liberated depending on who you ask, as well as these irrelevant islands: St. Kitts and Nevis, Barbados, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and other nations I didn't name. All right, Hispaniola, Jamaica. Yeah, okay, you guys know where this is going, right? This isn't going to end well for the United States. Now, what would a hypothetical invasion of the US look like? That's kind of hard to imagine, to be honest. But also at this point, the US is definitely exhausted from the war, being the heavy lifter of the Western nations. And also, like, you know, once again, tens of million troops versus the US. Now, some people could make the argument, you know, the US would never surrender. Everyone has a gun in the US. True. But I gotta ask you this. Is military service required in the US? No. Just because you have a gun doesn't mean you know how to use it, especially against a foreign invading force who has military training and likely years of military training. So to the narrative that says that the US gun owners would be able to fight off a foreign invader, what are you going to do against a tank? What are you going to do when a fighter jet drops a bomb on your house? Gun owners in the US, sure, you might be able to, like, you know, do some redneck stuff over here in the Appalachian Mountains, and, you know, I'm only saying this because I'm from Virginia, of course, and you always hear stories about, like, crazy stuff happening in the Appalachian Mountains, and, like, there's also memes, like, Chinese soldiers landing in the middle of West Virginia, hearing the Star-Spangled Banner in the distance. It's stupid stuff. It's kind of funny, though. Unrealistic, though. Like I said, tens of millions of troops. Let's get this over with. The US is screwed. Also Canada. This video is over. You guys wish I ended my videos like that. I gotta do the outro. So, of course, the West will lose this war. As far as like a peace treaty, since these are non-Western nations and Western nations tend to just, you know, change your government rather than take land, it's possible that we would see land exchange, but just because of like the sheer amount of countries here, I don't think we need to do a peace treaty. But just to have some fun anyway, we have Mexico taking over all of their old land from the United States. Turkey would likely get a bunch of provinces from Bulgaria, from Greece. They'd probably take over all of Greece, actually. Russia and Ukraine, you know, they're doing their things. Finland probably wouldn't exist anymore. And then for Australia and New Zealand, likely just new governments, but you never know. But anyway, like I said, that will be doing it for today's video. So if you guys did enjoy it, make sure to leave a like on it and subscribe to the channel if you're new. In the comments below, I asked you guys already for a bunch of input and feedback or responses, but I have another one for you. This time I want you guys to also let me know in the comments, do you think that the non-Western nations would have infighting? I think I already asked this actually. But more so because there's so many conflicting ideologies and conflicting geopolitical tenures in the non-Western nations. Like in the West, like I said earlier, it's pretty geopolitically united. But the non-Western nations are very different. You know, Israel and Iran on the same team, extremely different nations. They bomb each other a lot. They don't like each other. Same thing with India and Pakistan, South Korea and North Korea. The West doesn't really have this problem, but the non-Western nations do. So let me know once again, do you think that I should have factored that in? Or do you think that they would put aside their differences in order to take down the West? Anyway, once again, that is going to do it for this video. All the support is greatly appreciated as we're once again trying to get to 200,000 subscribers. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. And of course, thank you to all our super fans. This includes Chillturn Mapping, Omega the YouTuber, Illy Goated, Nevada Garbage Trucks, Vista Mapper, Xander Pro Productions, Geo1010 Gamer, Knighthood 7353, and Golden Ball Mapping, 101 Rotanami T, King Cheese, Australian Geo Guy, Serminator, Icy Static FN, CTG on YT, Eagsco, Euroball, Augusto, A Norwegian, RS, Gail Martinez, Zaylance, What in the World? Freezioi, Laser Taze, Pablo Sigma Cat, Death Strider X, Hammer Toad 45, and DW Cool Dude. Once again, thank you guys.